Wonderful.
And that's what I think of Orville Peck.
How are you doing? Things are tough, and they're not getting super easier anytime soon.
It's bubbled water. I have to spritz it over my shoulder.
Yeah, things are challenging all around. And I think just given that there are now going to be loosening up of restrictions and all sorts of stuff coming up, recently announced in a ridiculous display of misinformation yesterday. I feel like I should be inclusive in my political statements and like recognize both sides, but there are not two sides to this. Like,
we don't know what you're talking about yet.
Doug Ford and the press conference yesterday. But the end result is that things will be opening up further. And I know that for some of you this is fantastic because, my goodness, it has been a long 2 years. And then for others of you...
What's 720 odd days between friends?
I know. And then for others of you, this is pretty kind of scary. What is this going to look like? How is this going to affect the health of my family or of me, and all of these things? And so there'll be all sorts of, sort of further spreading. It's, some of us are already feeling this way, both ways, but they'll just be sort of further dividing up over the next few weeks. And so we are going to be practicing patience and understanding, and all of the things that that we can do in order to make sure that we get through this together. That's like, you, us, everyone, we will do our best. You are definitely doing your best. We have a tiny update in that the marking for midterm 2 is, midterm 1, or the topic test 1, is coming along just fine. Everything looks really good. We have a couple of tweaks that we have to make. We will let you know if we see any delays, but we are aiming for a Friday release. There'll be an announcement too of like what to do, and also, I guess, sometimes there are a few little adjustments that happen, when you release 950 grades.
It's all fine right away.
No, sometimes there are a few things that happen, and so we may make some adjustments, but we'll try to make all those adjustments before they get released. But anyway, we kind of like hold on after we release grades, going, okay, we're waiting for the emails. So just know that we can fix all sorts of things and challenges and whatever. So it's all good. There's the cat. Thanks, Wesley. I like the cat. What?
You've probably all seen the video of that landing, the aborted landing at Heathrow Airport a few weeks back, where the pilot came in, was coming in, the pilot comes in, and then the wind comes up and the plane starts going like this, and then the pilot comes like, let's try this again.
I didn't see that.
Well, I feel like we've started like that today. That we've come in and we're like, so I think we should all get up.
Get up? Are we getting up? What are we doing? We're just going to come in?
We're going to try to get in. Hi there.
Hello.
Hello.
I think we're good. Okay. So some of you are still coming in, which is why we haven't really dived into anything important. But as soon as the numbers coming in start to slow down, and really as soon as the popsicles are done, we will move on.
Oh, I see. There's the Wi-Fi in the library is not working at all today.
Oh, how does that affect you?
Well, I'm sure it affects lots of people who are in the library trying to be here, but not.
Somebody wants to know where Lily is.
I'm not sure. Oh, yeah.
It's right there. There's Lily. Okay. Oh, Doug could come too. Okay. Awesome. I think we're ready. Are we ready? I think we're ready. I hope.
Yeah, and the suggestions, I'm not sure actually who to complain to about the library, but the front desk is a great idea.
Yeah, they'll let you know what's going on.
People want to know how Lily's feeling.
Expensive. Lily is feeling expensive. Lily has to spend some time at the OVC, which means that there are some problems. So she has a tumor that needs to be removed.
It is a tumor.
It's a tumor. And there is a 95% success rate with the procedure. And unfortunately, it does not cost $95. So there you go. But anyway, here we go. Okay, I'm going to now clear everything. and we will step into the
Very serious.
Squirrel Life project. Just a reminder, I think about 140 of you have already filled out the little safety quiz that we have to do through like the safety office at the university. We need you to fill that out before doing the Squirrel Life walks. But it is it's an assignment, part of the course. There's a whole section in the content section that talks about it and all of the, things that that are required, and also different options if going on walks is not accessible to you. It's totally fine. We have other options that you can do. Any questions, there's that email address, squirrellifeguelph, I think it is, @gmail.com. And better than that, the person that runs Squirrel Life, Liz, my master's student in my lab, who is amazing, who just got accepted to do a PhD with me yesterday. So Liz is going to be in my life for a long time, which is kind of my goal because Liz is amazing, is going to be in the student hour after this class if you have any Squirrel Life questions. And we'll probably be recruiting volunteers over the summer to participate as we grow Squirrel Life and make it even awesomer. So if any of that stuff is interesting to you, and you want, or you have questions specifically about the Squirrel Life project in 1070, Liz will be here after class to answer any of those. Cool. Yes. Great. Okay. Now, squirrel. We have the homework question. So this question is based on the homework, and it is right here. Yeah. Okay. And it's based on one of the data sets that we provided. So just go ahead, and the homework was to figure out, which of the variables were sort of more important, or how they affected survival. And this is just one of them. So if you have notes from your homework that you were able to do, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll give you 2 minutes. It might be hard to kind of go through it in 2 minutes, but you may be able to right now.
You know what Liz's email is?
I know where to find it.
Whereabouts?
On course link. Content, Squirrel Life. See it?
Nope.
Just maybe another 30 seconds or so. Go to the end. Skip to the end. Go up. Somewhere. Find it. Okay. Cool. Okay. So just 10 more seconds. and end. Share results. So the answer that I have is C as well. So most of, 49% of you got C, which is correct. Just to take a look, I guess the next one we should kind of address is the one just above it. So here, just super quickly, for those of you interested in how to get to the finding of C, let's just take a look at the 3 different treatments. And if we were going to try to figure out whether light had an effect on survival, which 2, can you just stamp for me, which 2 would you compare in order to figure out whether light had an influence in survival? Super. Yeah, really good. Okay, that's great. Yes. So it would be A and C because the important thing is that the level of competition for water is the same between the 2 groups, right? So if we were going to now try to figure out what the effect, and you can see it's between 17% and 70% survival, right? So now if we were going to take a look at the effects of competition for water, which 2 are we going to be comparing now in order to figure out? Very good. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So that's because we're maintaining the level of light at the same for the comparison. We're kind of isolating it to just that one variable. Of course, biology is a lot more complex than that, but if we're just going to focus on these 2 variables, we would try to maintain the other variable at the same level, irrespective of what it is. And then we can take a look at the survival rate and we can say, okay, it's between 85 and 70, so not nearly as big of an effect as between 17% and 70%. So competition for water is going to be more important, and then light is going to be secondary. It's not to say that there's no effect, but just not as important as the competition for water.
There's questions in the chat about what a weak condition, a strong limiting, a weak limiting.
Yeah. So those are sort of relative, right? And there's no sort of like, it must be between, 2 and 17 or whatever, right? So so they're relative to each other. And then of course, as you go through into your program, if you take statistics, there's a whole other layer of complexity there, right? Whether it's statistically significant or not, whether 85% is actually different than 70%, and all of those types of like ways of determining, significance. And then there are problems with the significance levels. And anyway, it's delightful and fun and interesting. But yeah, here, of course, it would be relative.
So compare amongst the conditions. If you see that kind of wording on a test,
don't
Google for like a definition of what a strong limiting effect is, but compare amongst the scenario that you've been given.
Okay, cool. Great. Okay, yeah. So today, this class, this particular topic used to be a lot more challenging to teach, but I feel like the only teaching benefit with COVID is that it becomes a little easier to teach the difference between density dependent and density independence. And so we're gonna grapple with that, but it's not gonna be nearly as hard as it's been in previous years. Because like we've learned a lot of stuff about density dependent factors in ecology. So hopefully it'll be interesting.
Yep. In 2018, when we talked about this and we talked about social or physical distancing, people would have been like,
"What's that?" But
that's even more confusing than strong and weak effects. What's going on?
Okay, but first...
But put those away in your brain, because
let's talk a little bit.
You know about some of the things we're going to talk about because of the phrases that you've been living with for the past 720 days.
That's right. And so we've talked a little bit about species and what species are. And today we're going to talk a little bit about populations and what they are and how we can kind of like talk about them meaningfully. So we're going to talk about moose. Yeah,
we're going to talk about several examples about populations of particular species that we know a lot about. So we're not going to talk about little things. on average. We're going to talk about big things that we can count. Because you would imagine that big things that we can count and that taste good, like these things, we would have a pretty good handle on all of the factors involved in how moose populations increase or decrease. And we actually have in Canada, prior to its inclusion as a province in Canada, but we have a kind of a natural experiment about a population of moose and how they increase or decrease through time. Because Newfoundland, the island, Labrador has moose. They're fine. Newfoundland doesn't have moose, or it didn't until the late 19th century and early 20th century, when that moose plus 3 others were brought to Newfoundland. So we know some of this. Now, actually, we know even in the popular press, some of what's here from this Corner Brook newspaper in 1945 isn't actually correct, because we know that moose have been introduced into Newfoundland intentionally by people twice. You see the bottom one from Nova Scotia, where there was 3 moose brought in 1878, and they set up kind of on the mid-northern shoreline. And then another introduction of 2 males and 2 females, and that's where the photograph's actually from in the last one that's incorrectly labeled by the newspaper in 1906. So 2 separate introductions of a very small number of very large animals. If you haven't seen moose before, it's an amazing experience, and please never do so without an escape plan. I mean, they can hundreds and hundreds of kilograms, these things weigh. They're very large, very fast animals in very complicated environments. They're gorgeous. But in this environment where they hadn't been before, there's no predators. And so you can see through time, this is the number of moose on the left-hand side and years. So moose, probably what we're seeing is something, we talk about density independent and dependent, and we'll introduce these things, but you can see they're not very dense. Like if you were to look at the tapestry of moose across Newfoundland, the island of Newfoundland from 1900 until the interwar, between World War I and World War II, moose are very dilute. There's just a soupçon of moose around that island. But around the late 30s and early 40s, things get bad for much of the world, but for moose, they get good. They get really good. There's lots of moose love happening because the density is increased and they're finding each other. Those numbers increase very rapidly. Like for a big animal, super rapidly. From 4 moose to 141,000 moose is the peak of that. And they keep going up and down, but they keep going up and up and up because there aren't a lot of, we've done this intentionally, but there aren't a lot of predators. There's no kind of naturally occurring predators for this animal. And so there's a whole bunch of problems with that. One of them is the fact, if you've been to Newfoundland, at least prior to maybe 10 years ago when they started to change these road signs, because people kept stealing them because they're a really cool road sign with that moose just kind of looking at the car and going, and then walking off. 700 vehicle accidents per year. There's not a lot of roads in Newfoundland, right? If you've been, but there are a lot of collisions. Moose and human conflict is a real thing. And people have been trying to deal with these numbers by beginning to manage this. And some of the management plans involve consumption, so predation, turning moose into bologna. But now, so from a founder population, think back to our first evolution kind of time together. Remember, we're kind of adding bits to this onion as we go. So we could be talking about the genetics of this introduction, but we're going to talk about the numbers, the ecological effect of this introduction, or any introduction. And we could do this with moose, and I love doing this with moose, but we could do it with a whole bunch of other things. Rabbits into Australia, pythons into the Florida Everglades. Or, and this one kind of blows my mind, and maybe next year, instead of talking about moose, the Canadian example, we'll talk about Pablo Escobar's hippos in Colombia. Pablo Escobar, the drug lord, loved animals.
Cocaine hippos.
And he imported 4 hippos to run on his many thousand-hectare compound. When he was arrested, and everything was seized by the government, there was a lot of seizing that happened, and not a lot of, let's say, knowledge about what to do with hippos, because second largest, I think they're the second largest land animal.
And the deadliest.
And they're angry.
Yeah.
Like wherever a hippo is right now, if you want to imagine what it's thinking, just be like, ah! And that's what the hippo is thinking. So large and angry and now free and running up and down several major river tributaries in Colombia. 4 of them we now estimate up to, it's that low estimate, so the more than 100 wild occurring hippos. And this is that little graph there I loved. It was a population viability analysis that looked at if we ate a lot of hippos, shot a lot of hippos, castrated a lot of hippos, could we get the numbers down? And what that graph shows you is, nope. Hippos are going up until there's going to be thousands of hippos. And there's a carrying capacity for thousands of hippos. I love numbers.
Yeah.
I like the population things. These are variables that for big animals and for human populations, all of these, there's a whole bunch of variables that it's just like there's a currency to it and we can estimate these things. And as someone who studies small animals, I aspire to a scenario where we will know for little animals lots of the things that we're about to discuss with you here.
What's the carrying capacity for nematodes?
All.
Like, that's just a number.
There's a nematode biologist who's an amazing guy, a Scottish guy, who claims that if you muffled, like if there was The Leftovers, like if you've seen that HBO series where just X% of the population disappears, and it's sad, and that's the whole series. It's really sad. And people are damaged.
Yep.
But his hypothesis is that if all of that happened, or if, let's make it a happier thing at the end of like the spoiler alert, when everybody kind of vanishes in some of the Marvel things, there would be a shadow of nematodes. If all of the world just vanished, there would be for a second a shadow of nematodes, because there's enough nematodes, diversity and abundance living on us, within us, and on your walls and in your carpet and on your trees and just everywhere, that you could make out the shape of the world just by nematodes.
Note to self. Don't
Never bring up
nematodes.
I've got more.
Okay, so Smith likes to quantify things. Smith likes to think about things. So do I. I like to be able to describe things sort of precisely using, sort of ideas that are distinct, that are different, that have consequences and implications, right? So remember a while back we said, try to think about different variables or different things that apply at different levels of organization. And so if you want to that list, here's not a comprehensive list, but a pretty good list.
Certainly a good starting point.
Of the variables that apply to a population. So we can talk about a population's distribution, either in terms of area or volume, if it's going to be aquatic.
Because we're inclusive.
Or
we think
terrestrial.
about the marine environments and the freshwater environments.
Under terrestrial, too, we can talk about volume, right? There's dimensionality there.
Nematodes! Can I talk about nematodes again?
So we could also talk about abundance. We could talk about the number of individuals
of nematodes.
They're huge. Then we can, now that we've got area and number, we can make that into a ratio, and we can talk about the density, right? The number of individuals per unit of area or volume. We could talk about birth and death rates. So that's a delta of n over time, so abundance over time. We could talk about the sex and the age structure, so mostly focusing on males versus females. With the EPP, we're going to challenge you a little bit, don't worry. But there will be some intersex or some differently sexed individuals because it's important.
But also in terms of age structure, about whether or not there's most of the population, the numbers, are they all young?
Yeah.
Or are they mostly all older? Or are they intermediate?
Yeah, exactly. We can talk about fecundity, so that's the number of eggs produced. We can talk about fertility, which is the percent of the eggs that produce viable offspring. So different, similar type of concept, but distinct, right? We can talk about production. So that's the number of offspring produced by a population. Or the recruitment is the number of individuals
we want you.
reaching breeding age. That includes the offspring and immigration. So there are kind of lots of things that we can talk about for a population, and each of these variables might come in handy in different ways depending upon the questions that you're asking.
And they're each kind of discussable as numerically, but also verbally.
Conceptually, yeah, absolutely. And it really does matter what species we're talking about, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we could talk about nematodes, but let's not talk about, we don't talk about nematodes.
No, there's people who want to talk about nematodes in the chat.
We could talk about nematodes. We could talk about diatoms, which are just stunning things. Little plants, kind of, sort of, wrapped in glass a little bit. They're just phenomenal things that are everywhere in water, in the oceans. You can get, hundreds of thousands, millions per meter squared. And we can talk about ladybird beetles, right? And 50 per meter squared would be a substantial number.
But if it was 50 per meter squared of moose, that would be a very dense environment.
Dense moose. Yeah, so obviously the species matters, right? And the amount of space that they occupy as an individual matters
The species and the spaces.
That's right. So just to kind of, lay it out there in very obvious terms, when we're thinking about populations and the way that they change over time, we can think about the population at time 1, right? So we can define that however it is we want to define it. And then the population can increase to population at time 2, or it can decrease. And if it increases, it's going to be due to birth and immigration are the 2 possibilities. And if it decreases, it's going to be due to death and emigration, right? And these are kind of the 2 possibilities. So again, when you're thinking about plausible hypotheses for why a population would change, just keep in mind that, there are two probable or possible outcomes or answers in each direction. For those of you that like to have a nice little formula, this is what the formula would look like in order to calculate what your population would be at time 2. So you want to take population 1 at time 1, and you want to add the birth minus the death plus the immigration minus the emigration, and that'll give it to you. But again, you can kind of walk through this conceptually to get to the right answer.
And so this is not just something we would introduce to you as like, here's a thing that you'd learn in first year university. This is the underpinning of like a deterministic species model that people would use. They would write this code into R, and they could run a scenario that might have other things acting on it.
That's right.
Chaotic events, stochastic events, weather, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
All sorts of things, but this would be what would be the kind of under the hood that all of those things would be happening to.
That's right.
And these are those variables that each of those short form, the B, the D, the I, and the E. Those are the things that I wish, as a biologist of small things, that we knew for most cases. So I remind you again, for most species on the planet, we don't know those things.
We got it. Okay, and within an area, within a certain density, there is also the possibility of a different distribution or spatial distribution within a habitat, for example, right? And there are two. There are 2 types of distributions. And the third one, I don't think it exists, but
It does.
it doesn't. But the 2 are kind of really cool. So let's think about, within a habitat, you can have a distribution of individuals within a population that can be clumped, or they can be even. And when we're talking about even, we're not talking about like chessboard even. We're talking about more or less even, where, the distance between the individuals is within a range such that there aren't greater distances among groups of individuals, right? So that's how you would differentiate between even and clumped. And then there's random, and random has all sorts of like question marks, because for me anyway, random might speak more to our ignorance of a situation or of a system, rather than the actual mechanism by which individuals of a species are distributing themselves. But if we focus on clumped, we usually see when there is an important or limiting resource. Okay, so we may see individuals clumped around a water source. We may see plants that are, in need of high levels of water in the soil to be sort of along the edge of a river or a lake or something like this, right, in clumps. Even distribution It can happen for many reasons, but one of the reasons that I think about has to do with individual territoriality, right? So we've heard this word territorial. When we talk about territorial, we mean sort of the space preferences or requirements of an individual within the population, right? So if you have a territorial species, it's a species where the males or the females kind of guard their own personal space, right? To the exclusion of other individuals of that same species. And so when I see an even distribution, I think of penguin rookeries or of gannets. And this is what an even distribution. These are northern gannets, actually. So they fly. They're absolutely stunning. They have like airbags in their face in order to, minimize the impact as they go diving into the sea in order to get fish. They're beautiful. And they have this beautiful, like powdery yellow plumage on there. They're stunning. And this is what an even distribution would look like in sort of a natural world scenario, right? Each of them are just enough distance away so that they don't actually peck each other's eyes out. And that's it. Otherwise, they want to be closer together in order to minimize the effects of predation and all sorts of things related to the benefits of being together. But they don't like each other as individuals, so they keep their own little teeny tiny space, right?
So in the absence of both of those scenarios, you talk down the random distribution in a bunch of cases, but we have two scenarios on the left and in the center, where there's clumping of resources and territoriality as two potential mechanisms, and there's lots of life where neither of those things apply.
Yep.
Where their resources are kind of abundant and around, and there isn't any territoriality because maybe you're not even that kind of conscious, and you're not a
like
big
nematodes?
cephalized like nematodes or like most of the life on the bottom of the ocean. There's often kind of random or not different from random distributions of things when resources aren't clumped and there's no territoriality or no social structure to things.
Sure. So
you can come back next year to this class and we'll have the same discussion again. I have not yet been successful.
I don't believe in random. Okay, so which of these distributions, using your stamp, is associated with the human species? So go ahead and stamp, please, on the box which one you think it is. We're favoring the clumped. Cool.
So then what's the resource?
Even, maybe. What's the resource? What are we clumping around? Somebody's like random.
The Wi-Fi.
The Wi-Fi. That's funny. Okay.
Always so surprised. It happens somewhat regularly.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh,
so
there's a question in there. Is it kind of both for humans?
Is it kind of both for you? Really good. So, taking a look at this map.
That's a great observation.
What if we gave you this map? We are giving you this map. What, based on this map, is the distribution of humans? Do you think? Pop it in the chat. Write it on the screen. It doesn't matter. All of you that think that this is clumped, put a stamp on the left-hand side of the screen. All of you that think that it's something else, put it on the right-hand side. Okay. Yeah, this is good. So this is evidence of clumped, right? We see these cities where these populations are much denser. People are living in these clumped areas, and historically, it has a lot to do with fresh water.
And that's exactly right. Papa just said in the chat around bodies of water, and even more around entries of some rivers and systems into bodies of water.
And when we think about like the colonial history of North America in particular, this distribution speaks less to our need to have fresh water and more for our need to colonize and take people's land. Because this was, through the St. Lawrence, this was the access point. This is where large ships came in and eventually settled as they moved their way through occupying North America. So it is a colonial clumped history. Why isn't it random? Because it is clumped around these historical ports and entryways into occupation.
And lots of times those in the colonial history, those were colonizers and settlers that displaced the peoples that were already living there.
That's right. That's right. Okay. But somebody said, isn't it kind of both? So
Yeah.
if we zoom in, so remember, we're doing scales, right? Different geographic scales. If we go from a regional down to a local scale, if everybody that thinks that this is clumped, put on the left. If you think that this is even, go on the right. There we go. Yeah.
I'm almost going to get this out of my system by typing it, but I'm not.
Oh,
This is Dr. Jacob's least favorite song, but I can't.
Don't
little
say,
boxes
"Oh, no!"
on the hilltop, little boxes full of...
No. Okay, so it goes from a clump distribution to an even distribution depending upon the scale. And that works super well with seabird colonies as well, right? Because the gannets are going to be in colonies that are clumped, but then within the colony itself, the distribution of individuals would be even. So this is how you can go from clumped to even, or the other way around, depending again on the species and the scenario.
And the spatial scale. And so before you jump ahead, there's a
Yeah.
great observation, if you go back to that in the chat, about the question about, is it then clumped or even or random within the house?
Right.
And that depends
That's
on the
it.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that depends on the Wi-Fi. Okay, so some variables to consider are how resources are distributed within the habitat. So maybe the resources are evenly distributed and therefore the individuals are, but if they were clumped, then the individuals would be clumped too. The types of interactions among the individuals and the dispersal mechanism. So all the things that we've kind of introduced already within this ecology unit. And carrying capacity is another really, really important term that we've already introduced to you by talking about, moose and hippos.
I think I say a hippo in the back there.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe someday.
And when we took a look at that moose growth curve, right, the population growth curve, it really did have this kind of S. Things were pretty slow for the first little while, right?
Because moose can't find each
They
other.
weren't getting together, right? But then
they can't make babies.
And then they did, and it became really quite rapid as soon as they had access to each other in order to reproduce. And so this type of curve is super characteristic of a population growth curve. And so what we'd love for you to do, and certainly like as you're studying and preparing, this would be a really, really good thing to do, is to think about all of the different things that could be going on in a population at each of these points, right? So think about the moose, think about their story, and see if you can kind of add time points like, oh, moose are starting to meet each other and starting to have babies. There's low competition and all of that stuff. What's going on here at this inflection point? And then finally, what's going on up here? And what's limiting that population growth curve? So these are things that you can consider as you kind of walk through the moose story. And then we don't have time today for this, so not right now, but again, what you want to do is think about like the different things that could be happening along the way. And then, of course, sometimes there are exceptions, right?
And there's been some discussion earlier on in the chat when we're talking about this.
Yeah.
Has anyone calculated what a carrying capacity for our own species would be?
That's right. So the carrying capacity, according to some pretty smart math people, economists for the most part, is about 10 billion as of right now. The thing is, though, that our history and the history of humanity generally is a bit sort of complex because carrying capacity has kind of increased with technology or with colonial activities, right? So, if we were talking about the carrying capacity of Europe, but then all of a sudden people were like, oh, let's go and take the lands of other people. It increased again then the carrying capacity of Europeans. And dramatically changed population levels of peoples that were already established within their own territory. So it's a complicated thing to talk about it because things happen, technology advancements, medicine has dramatically changed the carrying capacity of the planet, as well as agriculture and all sorts of other things, other technologies.
Wi-Fi.
But sometimes we have to think about it in terms of the way that externalities affect a population, right? And if we want...
What's an externality?
An externality is something that is not of your species. So something else that is affecting a population. And we talk about it in terms of population control or population management. And there are sort of...
So people making bologna out of moose.
Yeah, people trying to kill raspberries in their backyard because the raspberries are taking over, right?
Oh, but they're delicious.
But also, trying to get rid of bed bugs if you have... No, don't have bed bugs. Or trying to limit a pest if you're, growing a crop, right? These are population control or management attempts. And the way that you can do that really plays into all of these variables that we've kind of like thrown at you in the last little while. You can do that in a couple of ways. One is a density-dependent population control management strategy, and the other is a density-independent population control management strategy. And I feel like our experiences collectively through COVID-19 will make this a little bit easier to understand than in past years.
Yeah, because they affect at a population level, whether or not we're trying to manage it, both of these factors exist.
Exactly. So a density-dependent factor means that its effectiveness, its ability to control or limit population growth, is dependent upon the density of the population. So if the population is very dense, then this management strategy works really well. But then as soon as the population starts to drop off or decline, then the effectiveness of the treatment declines as well. So the example of something that is density dependent is unfortunately COVID.
An example.
Because COVID-19 spreads very well in dense populations, right? Because of this close proximity from person to person. The denser the group of people, the more effective it is at being transmitted. And doesn't work very well if we all live a mile apart from each other. And so its effectiveness, its transmission effectiveness, is density dependent.
So keep 2 meters apart if you're speaking moistly.
That's right. Okay. So examples of density dependence is disease, where close proximity is the vector for transmission. Then there are density independent control mechanisms. So this means that it either works really well or it doesn't work really well, but it has nothing to do with how dense the population is. So its effectiveness is not dictated by the density of the population. Okay, so here's our factors here. Factors affect per capita birth and death rates, but it's not dependent on the population density. And therefore, it can be really, really effective, and it can eradicate a population if it's really, really effective. Whereas a density dependent, so this like transmission of a disease, for example, or in introducing a virus, the less dense you get in the population, the less effective it is. So you can't really ever eradicate a population using a density dependent treatment factor. So some examples, some natural examples are like a really hard freeze that kills off a whole bunch of individuals. Doesn't matter how many individuals are there or how dense they are, it's going to kill them all or it's not, but its effectiveness doesn't depend on how dense they are.
So the parrot populations on Caribbean islands affected by hurricanes more frequently in a climate crisis, that's an independent. That is just, doesn't matter how sparse they are across the island. If the island gets walloped and the trees are all down on the ground, not so good for parrots.
Yep.
Are there more factors that are more effective in sparse populations?
Yeah.
Are there any factors that are more effective in sparse populations?
I'd have to think about that one. That's an excellent question, and that's the type of question that we want you to ask. Like, that's great. Yeah. Give us a bit to think about that one.
And you try and race us to it.
Yeah. Okay. So, zombies, sort of my absolute favorite thing in pop culture and viewing. And I
more
wish
than
there
Glass
were
Tiger?
I wish there were more zombie movies. But let's think about this. So, And there are many types of zombies, and you can pick your favorite type, or whichever one you're familiar
Throw
with.
in the chat some of your favorite zombie films as we're discussing.
Yeah, that's important. And as we're thinking about it, so...
And if anybody's from the town of Pontypool, do you know of the zombie movie that took place in your town?
Amazing. So let's think about zombies as a human population control mechanism. Okay, so think about just zombies as the thing that is going to control the human population. Would zombies be considered a density independent treatment or a density dependent treatment? And then, if you don't mind, some of you, in the chat, telling us why you picked one or the other. What's the reason?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Sorry, we're talking about films over here in the chat.
Oh, do you have some recommendations?
Train to Busan.
Oh.
Pontypool.
There
That
we
was
go.
the one.
Okay, so most of you, or all of you, are going with density dependent. What's the reason for why a zombie apocalypse represents a density dependent human population control? Why is that? No! No! Is this where I chop my arm off?
Yeah,
Is
it's excited real quick.
Denser populations spread disease more readily. No one-to-one bite. 28 zombies could get more people if there are more people around.
That's right.
Super good.
It's the whole, I don't have to run faster than the zombie, I just have to run faster than you.
Okay, so remember, it's not necessarily about the outcome though, right? So yeah, if there are more people around, zombies can get more, sure, but that's not exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about the transmission of the zombie virus, right, is better, happens better in denser populations, right? And so just be careful with that. Don't focus on the outcome, focus on the mechanism, right? What you've said is true, but to support the argument for why it's density dependent, focus on the actual mechanism of spread. Yeah, now, Walking Dead, have you all seen it? Is somebody going to freak out if I do a spoiler alert?
There's somebody that's there. I think it's MPLO 2. So
Okay.
large cities in The Walking Dead. So we're already kind of talking about it. We're moving towards it.
We're moving towards it, right? But if you remember, I think it's end of season 2, Walking Dead, yes, you do get the virus. Well, you already have the virus. You get the infection that kills you if you get bitten by a zombie, but everyone already has it. Right? Which suggests then that it's actually density independent, right? Because if everyone has it, people in rural communities had it also, and people in urban communities have it also. It's a very effective virus, and everyone has it. So that would be a density independent zombie apocalypse.
Upon which there is a density dependent effect because, yes, there
That's
was hot
right.
spots in cities.
Yes.
The whole, when they met Glenn. Above the tank
No,
when they went
that's
into
season
Atlanta.
1, yeah.
I know, but that's when it was still good. That's really the only season worth watching.
Okay, so another thing you could do then,
I agree.
as you're trying to like work through these, is take a couple of the different zombies: the fast zombies, the slow zombies, the World
Make
War.
a graph of all of, like, from 28 Days Later, like nominally perhaps not zombie films, but like
Independent,
show
dependent.
all of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Z Nation and all of those have different mechanisms of transmission, right? Some of them are dependent, some of them are independent. Super good. So imagine after a breakout of zombies, and we take a look at a map of the distribution of where the zombies are in the United States. So take a look at this map, and what I'd like for you to do is decide whether this distribution supports the idea that this particular zombie apocalypse is density dependent or independent. Go ahead and let us know with your stamps what you think it is. Good. Okay.
There's clearly a vaccine mandate at the border here. I just want to say.
Okay, we are 1 minute over, so we'll wrap this up a little bit quickly. For those of you who said density independent, where were you focusing on this map as a way of saying, no, it can't be based on density? What was like your primary sort of like, oh, wait a second. Oh, you're focusing on Hawaii. Interesting. Okay. Okay. Cool. And then for those of you who were focusing, who were saying density dependent, where were you looking on the map? Yeah. 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 Good. Okay. Super. So there are some always, right? Some like, oh wait, that I like Nebraska. Like what? There's nobody in Nebraska. Why is there an outbreak of zombies? And so most of the data here on the map do support a density dependent, but there are these little outliers, and our brains tend to focus on outliers to go, no, wait a second, it can't be dependent, it's independent, because of Hawaii or because of Nebraska or because of Minnesota or whatever. And so this is where statistics and all sorts of things come into play that can help us make decisions about what things are. So thank you for that. I will clear. Yeah, the standard beams that we have to do.
No, but it's so, and there's some, you could make this.
Yeah.
So this is an applet that you can go and play around if you want and kind of parameterize it with different zombie scenarios or undead scenarios and see what kind of things you come up with. Because we're not going to see you for a couple of weeks.
That's right.
Well, a couple of sessions anyhow.
Save yourself.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Be safe.
Your time away, and here is your homework. It's all laid out there. We don't have to talk you through it. No. And enjoy your break. Take a break, and we will see you in a little while.